Welcome to Mixed Needs Mama podcast, where we talk about parenting mixed needs families and building a family culture that honors God and every member in our family. We're so glad you joined us today. I'm your host, Terrie Hellard-Brown, a mixed needs mama myself, and I help Christian parents in mixed needs homes move from survival mode to sustainable peace. Today, we're going to talk about critical thinking. This is a topic that I have wanted to talk about for a while, and I feel like it is such an important topic to address when we are talking to either of our children, neurotypical or neurodivergent. When we talk about it with our neurodivergent children, we are dealing with something a little differently. Sometimes we feel like our children are incapable of thinking critically, but they are not. So let's jump in and explore this topic together. So many times when I'm talking with parents at different live events, they bring up this topic of how do I help my child think critically? How do I help them examine the beliefs and the things being thrown at them? How do I protect them? We all are under the gun to really help our children build a biblical worldview and to think critically. It is so vital, especially today in our world with so many ideas being thrown at our children constantly. Like, there's a statistic out there, and I never remember it exactly right, but it talks about how because of the internet and social media and all that we have available to us today through the media, our children are being bombarded with more ideas in a single day than many of us would have dealt with in a whole lifetime before we had all of this technology. So I'm doing 2 episodes on this topic today, and next week we will be tackling this topic and focusing on our neurodivergent children. However, this applies to our neurotypical children as well. One of the things I've come to realize is that half the work in tackling this topic happens before we ever get to the strategies for teaching critical thinking. We're going to talk about the misunderstandings and what's actually happening and what we need to understand about our neurodivergent children. Today, I want to change how you see your child, because I think a lot of us are starting from a picture that's wrong. And if the picture is wrong, then everything else can be wrong as well, because we're building on the wrong foundation. This was very much true with me and my children because they had been misdiagnosed. We were homeschooling, and I was building on the wrong foundation so much. That is one of the main reasons I have so much to say, is not because I know everything, but because I've done so many things wrong. And I hope that that encourages you, because my children are alive and well and adults and adulting to the best of their ability. We have navigated a lot of wrong turns. So be encouraged today. You're not too far gone. You haven't lost the game. Your kids aren't hopeless. We will get there. I'm here to walk with you and to encourage you and to let you know you can make a lot of mistakes, and our kids are very resilient, even our neurodivergent ones. Sometimes maybe more so because they're so used to people not understanding them. So I want to start with a question. Has your child ever caught you in an inconsistency? I'm sure you're saying, oh, no. It's like, which one do I choose? I've had so many inconsistencies. For instance, maybe you said screens go off at 8 o'clock at night, no exceptions. And then one day you let one of your children finish a show that ends at 8:15. And what happens? Your child notices. Believe me, they notice. And they brought it up loudly, possibly at a very inconvenient moment. But you said 8 o'clock and you let her stay up later. So now in this moment, that feels like arguing. It might even feel like a little bit of rebellion, and it feels like your child is weaponizing your own words against you. We might even feel a little bit, defensive and get upset with our child confronting us in not so kind a way. And we also get exhausted in the process of all this. I want you to look at what really happened there. Your child observed a rule. They remembered it. They compared today's events against that rule, and they spotted a contradiction. Then, on top of that, they constructed an argument. That is critical thinking. That's the whole skill in a nutshell right there. Observation, comparison, spotting contradictions, and building a case. Your child did all of it. Oh, my kids did this to me. And I will say, my neurotypical child spotted them much more quickly than my neurodivergent children, or at least she was more vocal about it. I'm not convinced that my neurodivergent children didn't see inconsistencies, but my neurotypical one always did and took advantage of it a lot. My neurodivergent children often saw the inconsistencies and just went with the flow because that's just the way life was. They had been beaten up enough with other people around them, and they didn't speak up too often, sadly. But it doesn't mean they weren't thinking critically. That's another thing we're going to address here, their response to these inconsistencies, their ability to feel able to make the argument and not be criticized and beaten down. So we are going to talk about that as well, because that is something we need to address. There were so many times when my kids were young that I was so inconsistent, and I still struggle with it today. I am a loosey-goosey parent. My husband is more, because of his ADD, he's very structured and has his rules and his plan, and he sticks with it much better being ADD than I do with being neurotypical. And that is an interesting thing to note as well. Neurodivergent people tend to stick with the routine and the rules much more than the neurotypical people do. We can get tired and make excuses, and we can avoid this and avoid that and procrastinate. And I'm not saying that neurodivergent children don't procrastinate, they do too, but kind of for different reasons. They prefer predictability and being able to know what to expect. So loosey-goosey is not a good thing. That has been something that I have had to learn, because that is just not who I am. And that is not a good thing when you're parenting neurodivergent children. So here's why I'm starting with this. So many parents of neurodivergent kids carry around concern that their child can't think critically. It could be because of something a teacher said. Maybe your child struggles with open-ended questions. In fact, I can probably guarantee they do. Maybe at school they've melted down, and when asked to explain their reasoning or what they're thinking, they just shut down. So we've decided somewhere along the way that this kind of deep thinking is just their weak spot. It's something they can't master and that they can't do. And so we make excuses, we change the way we talk, we offer answers instead of just asking questions and waiting for them to think it through. We cut them off at the knees, basically. I've learned this in my marriage as well with my ADD husband. That isn't the way to build the relationship. We are hurting our children when we do that. So when we lower the bar, and yet our children are so capable, we just aren't recognizing it. We are not helping them. We are actually hindering them. So we will stop asking real questions. We'll stop really connecting with them and just accept the shrug and the I don't know as the end of the conversation, instead of pushing further, because we don't want to be unkind. We don't want to stress them out. We want to keep the status quo. You know, I talk a lot about building peace in our family culture here. By peace, I don't mean settling for the status quo. Peace doesn't just mean avoiding problems. True peace comes from God and is a very open, raw, and real peace that is transparent and wrestles with God's word and asks all the questions. Yet there's peace there. That's what we're striving for. That's what we want. If you doubt what I'm saying, think about this. If you have autistic children especially, they have a thing that they love. There's a topic, there's a subject, there's something that they love. The child who can't write a paragraph about a book can recite the entire tech tree of their favorite video game and explain exactly why one strategy beats another. The child who freezes when you ask, "What do you think?" can tell you in exhaustive detail why the movie version of their favorite book got a character wrong, with evidence cited from memory. That's analysis, that's evaluation, that's argument with evidence, and that, my friend, is critical thinking. They are masters at it, probably better than our neurotypical kids are. It's critical thinking at its best, but we see it most strongly evidenced in the areas that they love. So we know that the capacity is there. What our kids struggle with is different. There's three things I want to talk about that they struggle with, and that's hitting on the topics I've been mentioning ahead of time. The first struggle is moving the skill between contexts. So we see them just shine in their area of expertise, in the area that they have, done deep dive in. They know everything about it. I don't know what your kids' thing is. Each of mine have a different thing. My oldest daughter, hers are art and animals. It amazes me the things she knows, the facts, everything. She can even argue because she has strong opinions about animal welfare. My older son, his thing is engineering, understanding how things work. He likes to pull things apart and understand how they work. And then the other side that he is so compassionate about is people. And it's so ironic to me that a person who struggles with relationships and social situations is so compassionate for people. If you are his friend, he cares deeply about the things that you care about. He cares deeply about the things you're experiencing. And he has such compassion and empathy for people. And it's just so ironic to me when I look at where he struggles as an autistic young man. And my youngest, his thing is anything to do with geography and history. You can't stump him if you were to ask him anything about history. And that bleeds over into politics. Even though he hates politics, he still has opinions, and he can support his opinions and have a very civil argument about his beliefs and his ideas. And then his other area, I would say, is evangelism. He really knows the gospel and can happily discuss scripture with anyone. It's not like a chip on his shoulder trying to get you to convert. He loves to have the conversation, and hopefully it opens doors and plants seeds. But I love the way he can argue and think about things and think through things. Critical thinking is such a strength for these children. We just have not always recognized it. Okay, so that's struggle number one, is taking what they know and how they know how to argue and moving into other contexts. A lot of neurodivergent kids build skills in one area, and those skills stay in that area. The reasoning they do effortlessly about Minecraft doesn't automatically travel to history class or to a disagreement with a sibling. For most neurotypical kids, that travel happens somewhat naturally. Not always, but somewhat naturally. For many of our kids, it has to be taught on purpose and step by step. Nobody's told us that. We assumed that if the thinking shows up here, it's going to show up here, and that it would be effective everywhere. When it doesn't, we conclude that the critical thinking isn't there and it's not real. But it was real. It's just stuck in its own little compartment. The way I understand it, if you've ever had your children learn a different language, my kids grew up in Taiwan. So my two youngest went to Chinese school when they were little. And with my youngest, Chinese was practically his first language. They would go to Chinese kindergarten, which is a 3-year kindergarten in the system, and they would communicate with their teacher and speak Chinese fluently and understand everything. Then we would try to find out what was going on. And when they talked to us, they spoke English fluently. We could communicate, no misunderstandings. But when we asked them to explain what their teacher said, their teacher would say something to us, and we didn't have that vocabulary yet, so we wouldn't understand what she was saying. The first time it happened, it was my daughter, and she could not tell me what her teacher said. She could talk to her teacher about what she said, and she could talk to us about what we said, but she could not translate between the two. That doesn't happen till later on, when their brain develops that ability, and then they can shift between the two languages without even thinking about it, and sometimes not even being aware of it. And it is fascinating to watch. That's what I think of when I think of how neurodivergent children learn critical thinking is they can deep dive and know everything about their favorite topic and argue for it, understand the ins and outs, and critically think about the whole topic, but they can't translate it over here. So it's like there's a disconnect. When we help them bridge that, then they'll be able to use this kind of critical thinking in every situation, or at least in a lot of situations. But we've got to help them bridge that. Okay, struggle number 2, all or nothing thinking. Our neurodivergent children tend to be black and white, no gray area type thinkers. There's right and wrong, there's fair, unfair, true, false, and there's no in between, there's no ambiguity. And they have a really hard time when we start telling them there is. There is more than one way to look at something. There's sometimes two rights in certain situations. So we work really hard to help them get out of that box and to think about things from another person's viewpoint, to understand what someone else is saying, and to think it through. It can just shut them down. It can be really difficult for them. It can be physically uncomfortable if we don't give them certainty, if we don't give them a yes or no, and we say, we'll see, or it depends, or probably. That can really be difficult for them. Another thing that we don't talk about enough is disappointment. When we say yes and we wind up having to say no later, this brings on tremendous disappointment to the point that they don't trust us and that they can be even depressed by it. This is so huge as parents. That can happen with our neurotypical as well, but it's felt much more deeply with our neurodivergent individuals. So we need to be aware of that we are tearing down stability, security, trust, all of that, because they need predictability and security. They don't like ambiguity, and they really struggle with uncertainty. So when we push them into gray areas without supporting them, without being there to help them navigate that, we can get resistance or shutdown. And again, we misread that as them not being able to think critically, when in fact we may be dealing with an emotion of a disappointment or a fear or just a sense of insecurity. Being aware of that and what's going on. Struggle number 3, shut down under load. Now, this one is a big one. And if you've listened to this podcast, you know we deal with this a lot. My kids did not tend to melt down. They tended to shut down. They didn't have like a temper tantrum type of meltdown. They would just, like a turtle pulling into its shell. If something was overwhelming, they just shut down. Even to this day, that's usually the way they respond, which I'm thankful for, because God knows I wouldn't have dealt as well with the meltdown as I did with the shutdown. Not that I handled that well either all the time, but it is a different thing to deal with. You're dealing with screaming. You're dealing with a child that seems out of control. My nephew would get that way because he would get so overstimulated he just couldn't handle it. And he didn't have the words, so he would scream when he was a little bitty kid. And that was really hard for my sister, because people just thought she had a brat. How we interpret these things, we need to understand our children and help them navigate this so that they aren't brats. They are the amazing people God created them to be. But under the load of questions, too many factors, too much uncertainty, they can just shut down. So think of it like a gas tank. Their ability to navigate life is fuel. They come into the ordinary day, they may be masking their feelings, they may be trying to manage the amount of sensory input they're having, they're trying to decode social situations, and they're trying to hold everything together to be what they understand they need to be instead of who they are. Then we come home to finish our homeschool day or whatever, we decide to tackle math, and we get immediate resistance. We get a shutdown. We get a meltdown. We need to recognize, at least in part, it's because they have already used the fuel they had. And approaching them with something that requires critical thinking or deep thinking is just too much. They don't have the fuel to do it. They don't have the gasoline in the tank to continue. So they answer with, I don't know, or they shrug, or they just shut down. And that's it. We don't try to help them think critically. We don't try to help them solve the problem. Maybe we punish them for not finishing their homework. So we need to recognize their capacity. And that's true with any child, but especially with our neurodivergent children, their capacity of what they can and cannot accomplish in any given time. I hesitate because our world, our culture tends to use a victim mentality and use it as an excuse and use gentle parenting, which is really, in some cases, not parenting. I am not talking about that. I'm talking about genuinely recognizing when our kids are just spent. You've done that. You've come home from work or from whatever event you've been at, and you just have nothing left. You have no energy. You can't think creatively or even think clearly. You are just exhausted. And all you can think of is, I got to go to sleep. I've got to sit down. Maybe you sit down in a recliner and you wake up hours later because physically your body was even hurting just from the sheer fatigue. If you can remember a time like that, then we can understand what our kids may be going through on a daily basis. If they go to a social event, church, co-op, or if they're in school, when they come home, they most likely have just used up everything they have. So to require a lot of questioning and answers and thinking and all of that is going to be difficult. And we need to think about this when we wait for doing discipleship when they get home from school. We're going to do discipleship at the dinner table that may not be as effective as it would have been at the breakfast table. We need to meet our kids where they are. Jesus meets us where we are. We need to meet them where they are and help them to navigate this. Maybe they need an afternoon, maybe not a real nap, but a time of mind-numbing activity or even a video game if that's what you decide to do. Something that's downtime, a safe place where they can recharge. Then we can tackle other things later. So being aware of how much masking they've had to do, how much social stress they've been under, so that we know when they're home with us, if we're doing homeschool in the afternoon after a co-op day, what are we going to do that day? Maybe we're going to focus more on the topics and the subjects that they thrive in, that they love. And maybe we'll do that hard math lesson tomorrow morning instead. Think through those types of situations and how we can help them. I always remember trying to help my son. He was really good at science and math. However, when he had an empty tank, math was not his thing. He could do it great, really well, when he wasn't exhausted. But when he was exhausted, if he missed one problem, he shut down. He had to do it 100%. Now, you got to understand, that's the mode he's coming from, is he had to make 100% or it was a zero in his mind. So if he missed one problem, he would shut down. So to give him that assignment when he was not fresh-minded and thinking clearly was setting him up for total failure, because in his mind, when he missed one problem, he got a zero. That wasn't what he got, and we tried explaining that and it didn't work. So we would always try to tackle math earlier and remind him that if he missed one, that you keep going. But putting him in that situation when he was exhausted was just not good. Now, after we look at those three things and start to really get a good and realistic picture of where our kids' brains are and what's going on, let's spend a few minutes and talk about why things don't work the same with our neurodivergent kids. Because we've probably tried what we do with our other kids or what others have told us to do, and it's just failed. It's flopped. It's not working. So the usual advice we get as parents, and I've given this same advice, is to ask lots of open-ended questions or to play the devil's advocate, to argue and have our kids make arguments, or to debate with our kids at dinner. For some of our children, that may work beautifully. But think about what a rapid fire questioning does for our neurodivergent kids. Number one, they process things more slowly. If you don't remember anything else I say here, remember that. They process things more slowly. So we've got to give them time to answer the question. Many of our neurodivergent kids are anxious about getting things wrong. They already feel like they're different from other kids. So if they have a wrong answer, they feel like that's going to be like the end of the world. So we need to understand that as well. If we ask them, why do you think that? And maybe we get a little emotional about some of their answers or their questions, then they understand it as they're in trouble when they ask a question or when they make a comment that we disagree with. And it all feels like they've been arrested and they're being interrogated. So that paints a different picture. That's what it feels like in their mind. And I can tell you with my husband, this is really true. So have tried to help my kids to know that they can talk about anything and ask anything, and it's okay. We do talk about being respectful, however. With my husband, if we got into a disagreement, and early on in marriage, you disagree on a lot of silly things, and we did. So I would argue my point and just shred him, basically. He couldn't think quickly enough to respond. He was still trying to get his thoughts in order. It was unfair. It was like being a bully. Now, I didn't recognize that. I wasn't intentionally trying to bully my husband. That's just the way I argued. I told him I love arguing. I think arguing is important because to me, arguing is communicating. And so it wasn't always an emotional argument, but we would be talking through things and he processed things much more slowly. And so what's made our marriage so much stronger is a talk and listen session. And I've talked about this before. It is such a wonderful gift and such a wonderful strategy for helping your person in your marriage or in your parenting and child relationship. The one that processes more slowly has an opportunity to process, and the one who's rapid fire has an opportunity to slow down and really think through what's going on. We would start with one person expressing whatever needed to be talked about, and they would share what they wanted to share, and the other person would simply take notes, write down what they heard the person say, and then we would repeat it back. For that person who thinks more slowly, who processes more slowly, it's evening the playing field. It's helping that person know that they've heard you correctly, and it's helping the other person. I felt seen and heard for the first time. At first, it feels weird, but it becomes really natural after a while. When we can teach our children the same thing, we're giving them a tool to slow down and be able to think through what they want to say. When we tell them that they can come to us with any question and talk about anything and that we are a safe place, we've got to live up to that. You cannot respond with anger and judgment and not really listen to what they're saying. If you're going to be that safe place, you've got to be that safe place. The what do you think, having them explain things, putting these demands on them, we need to understand that it might be too much. They may be taking what we're asking as judgment rather than wanting to really hear what they have to say. Sometimes they just can't put it into words. We're asking them to do a lot that they really aren't capable of doing. They are capable of critical thinking, but in that rapid fire moment, that pressure cooker moment, that we're asking them to generate ideas, to judge between the good ideas and the bad ideas, and to make a choice and to put it into words that they may not have to express what they're trying to express, and then to say the words out loud to someone who's being impatient or seems to be a little upset. That's not comfortable, and that's really difficult. We need to understand that. There's one more thing that we need to understand too, is maybe in our home we have been patient. Maybe in our home we've lived up to being that safe place, but they've been out in other places that have not been. They may have a long history of being corrected, being told they are wrong and corrected constantly. Even when it's told in love from us, they're still being corrected. So they're being told they're wrong, wrong, wrong. A child who is learned that everything they say is wrong, they just stop answering. We can't teach critical thinking to a child that has decided their thoughts are wrong, they're going to be reprimanded no matter what they say, and it's not safe to share their thoughts. So before any of the strategies we're going to talk about next week, this is something we've got to help our children relearn, and that we've got to be consistent in teaching them that they can ask anything, talk about anything. They're not going to be put down and told constantly that they're wrong. They may not be able to always answer, but that's interesting. Why do you think that? Where did you get that idea? Something like that. Where's this coming from? If we approach it that way, it's different than like an insistent support your theory here, but wanting to know where they came up with that idea. How did they find that? Or that their answer was interesting, just knowing that their answer was interesting, and that every answer is approached with patience. They need to know that. Okay, so I do want to cover one more thing, and I know this has been much longer than I intended. Thank you for staying with me this long. I think that we really need to think through these things and reframe how we're looking at what our children are doing. And then the last thing is the faith piece, of course, so important. Some of us carry a lot of worry about our kids and their future and their faith. And we want them to think critically about everything in the world and really reason things out and not just accept the stuff that's being thrown at them. But then when it comes to their faith, we don't want to hear the questions. We don't want them to say, how do we know the Bible is true? How do I know that God is real? These questions hurt us. They're hard for us. They terrify us. And we can't be afraid of them. If we look at the Bible, we can be very encouraged by all this. When Jesus was asked to name the greatest commandment, he answered. He said to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. We need to not be afraid. We need to encourage our children to wrestle with their faith and to think about God and his word with their mind as well as their heart and soul. Of course, faith is a part of that. There are so many things that we have to receive and accept by faith because our limited ability minds cannot fully grasp the whole concept of God. But we don't need to be afraid of wrestling. Think about Jacob in the Bible. I love that story. It is such an odd story where he's wrestling with God and he sees the angels on Jacob's ladder going up and down and ministering to him and everything. But in his dream, he's wrestling with God. And in the process, what I love is he comes out of that dream. Yeah, his hip is forever damaged. And so he's limping, but he is blessed. When we wrestle with God and wrestle with his word and want to understand it, we can too be blessed. If our ultimate goal is understanding and God, we want to grow closer to you. We want to draw closer to you. We want to be blessed by you. We're not wrestling out of rebellion. We're wrestling and grappling for understanding. And our kids need to do the same thing. If you look at the Bible, we see this wrestling everywhere. Nicodemus coming and talking to Jesus in the middle of the night. The Bereans searching the scriptures in Acts 17 to understand and see if what Paul was saying was true. And they were praised for that. And Proverbs is all about seeking wisdom, having understanding, having discernment, and treating it like the treasure that it is. We don't need to be afraid of our children's questions. We need to encourage it, not out of a sense of rebellion and not trusting God, but out of a sense of God, I want to understand you more. I want my faith to grow. I want to understand the word that you have given us and not just accept it as it is fed to me, spoon fed to me, but that I can wrestle with some of the things. When I read the Bible, I come away with more questions than answers many times because God doesn't tell us everything. He doesn't fill in the gaps all the time. And so we wrestle with things. Let them know they're allowed to wrestle, that this is a good thing. I can't tell you how much of a blessing it has been. My youngest son, I've shared some of these stories before, but he's the one I talk with the most about these things because he comes home and he's like, I don't believe like you do anymore. So your heart starts beating a little faster and you're thinking, what is he going to tell me? And I fought to stay calm when he first said this. And I said, well, what do you mean? And so he started sharing some things. The truth is, each time we've had these conversations, we actually don't believe that much differently than each other. We do believe pretty much the same way. It has been very eye-opening, and I feel closer to him the more we have these conversations. I love that he wrestles with his faith. I love that his faith is his. He's following Jesus because he has wrestled with his faith and has grown in his faith and is becoming a man of God. And that's what we want to happen. So don't be afraid to let your child think critically about their faith and to think critically about the things that we teach them. It's not comfortable, and I don't think it ever will be comfortable, but it is so vital. Have the conversations. They're amazing. Sit with your child and talk with them about what they're thinking and what they're wrestling with. You don't have to agree and affirm that what they're saying is right. You can tell them why you believe what you believe. I want to encourage you in that. Try not to be afraid. Let the Holy Spirit guide you as you have these conversations with your children. Let them have the time they need to process what they need to process so that you can have important conversations. I have one small assignment for you this week before we get to the strategies next week. Watch for critical thinking that your child is already doing, especially in their special interest area. If they're looking at where you are breaking the rules, breaking your own laws, and they're calling you on the carpet, look at that for what it really is. Do insist on respect. We can argue respectfully. And then in their arguments with their siblings, look at what they're arguing about. Look at how they're defending their point of view and trying to get their point across. These are all opportunities to watch them do critical thinking. And so write down what you notice, or at least somehow take a mental note. Notice that they are definitely doing critical thinking more than we probably realize. So next week, we will talk about 3 things you can do in ordinary moments. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for listening to this rather long episode. I hope it helps you and encourages you as you watch that our children really are thinking critically. And let's meet again next week and talk about 3 strategies that we can use to help them grow in this wonderful, important skill that all of our kids need today. Well, that all of us need today. If you have any questions or comments, please post those in the comment section, either on YouTube or on my blog post on my website at terriehellard-brown.com. And if you haven't joined my newsletter yet, I have a newsletter called All Wired In that I send out each month with an article that is on these topics that we're discussing and gives you some resources that you can use as a parent. And then I have a weekly newsletter that comes out letting you know what we've done this week, what we've created for you. And so if you join the mailing list, you can follow the link in the show notes. When you do sign up, it's not just signing up for a newsletter. You get a whole bunch of freebies. The first one you get are some conversation starters. They're for your family to use around the table, and they're kind of riddly. We also have story beginnings and story endings. This is our newest freebie that we've added in, so that when you're stuck at the doctor's office or you're in the car and you want to do something interesting, we have story starters or story endings. That one's so fun because they've got to create a story that ends with the ending that you're given ahead of time. Then you also get a list of books that I've vetted that are over 100 books to start your child's library. That is updated regularly. We have that available for a free download when you join my mailing list. And if you don't enjoy the mailing list, you don't enjoy the newsletter and all of that, you can unsubscribe at any time. but you get to keep the freebies. So you get those with the first newsletter that goes out to you. I have several automated emails that go out to you about discipleship and about neurodivergence and all of that. And so that comes to you for a few weeks. You get one a week of those as well. I appreciate you being here today and spending time with us. I can't wait to see what God is going to do in our families this week. He is at work, He is active, and He is alive. God bless you.